Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. This is the Connected Virtual Tech event powered by OnGo and the CBRS Alliance. We're very excited to have you with us today. And we have a fantastic panel here that's going to have a good conversation about a very important topic. The topic being fire codes that require in-building public safety radio coverage. And specific to the commercial real estate sector, how to optimize your investment. With us today on the call are Kevin Kurz, the wireless business manager from Annixter, Mike Castle, the CTO and co-owner of Communication Electronics, Scott Umamoto, the director of strategic technology at Day Wireless, Jeff Funderburg, the VP of real estate partnerships at Airwave Solutions, Rebecca Hunter, the vice president of Aero Wireless Group, and I'm your moderator for today. I'm John Foley with the Safer Buildings Coalition. So let's get right into it. Here's our agenda for today, what we're going to explore. So building owners, you're not without options or leverage, okay? This panel is going to help you out. We're going to look at the fundamental elements. We'll talk a little bit first about what these systems are, what they require, some of the code requirements. Then we're going to dig into what the cost drivers are. There are some swings in the prices of these projects that, and you are not powerless in controlling what some of them are, but you should also be aware of what the drivers are. Some common project pitfalls. We have experts here that have built, design, and provision material for a lot of these systems, as well as provided the funding for them. Proper planning for next-gen technologies so that you can leverage these investments to do things that your tenants want you to do in the future. And then finally, we're gonna really dig into the business model. Okay. So just a quick word first about the Safer Buildings Coalition. We're a 501c4 nonprofit, and Mike, Kevin, and Scott are all members, and hopefully some of our members are out there in the audience and visit us at saferbuildings.org. The three pillars of in-building public safety communications: 1, mobile 911 calls have to get out with location accuracy. 2, mobile mass notifications have to get in. And 3rd, first responder communications must work, and that's regardless of whether they're using land mobile radio of the kind that are required by the fire codes, or whether they're using smartphones for T-Mobile, Verizon, US Cellular, AT&T, FirstNet, any of those. So visit us at saferbuildings.org. So what's the problem? I'm going to jump ahead here, and I'm going to ask Mike Castle. Up on the screen, I've got a picture, Mike, of some low-E glass, and it's demonstrating one of the problems. What's the problem with low-E glass, Mike?
Low-E glass has a lot of metallic content in it, and radio waves don't like metallic content. So what ends up happening is the radio waves, whether they're trying to get out of the building or into the building, just bounce off and go the opposite direction. So it is it's a very effective way at making a building kind of RF proof, and communication can't happen in those types of enclosures.
Well, that's right. That's exactly right. You know, it's these materials are designed to prevent radiation from getting in. And what is sunlight but one of the wavelengths of radiation? Jeff, coming to you now. So looking at this diagram, is it just the glass that blocks the radio waves, or are there other things that get in the way of the signals getting into a building? So thinking about whether it's cellular DAS or public safety wireless or whatever, why is it that signals have trouble getting into the core of a building, Jeff?
The overall construction material can certainly impact the RF propagation of the signal as well. And we've seen a lot of older buildings that are really built like old bunkers. It's really tough to penetrate those too.
Coming to you, Rebecca. So Rebecca, this is LEED certified buildings. A lot of time comes up, people have heard of LEED certification. What's the goal of LEED certification? And is that more likely to be encountered in new construction or existing buildings?
Yeah, so LEED is, has been around now for a while and is widely accepted for looking at energy efficiency, sustainability, green building initiatives. And a lot of what you were just talking about, the low E glass and different materials that are being used are being seen obviously in the newer buildings, which is creating some of this difficulty with, penetrating the outside wireless into the buildings, which is driving this need to really focus on how we get the connectivity more specifically inside the buildings.
So we have certain business drivers, whether it's the need for saving money on energy efficiency, or even compliance issues that are causing investment on one side. They're doing a good job of keeping radiation out of buildings is causing another problem. And so, there's a mechanism that drives these requirements of this compliance, and it's the fire codes. Kevin, coming to you here. So can you talk a little bit about the fire and building codes that require that properties ensure first responder communications?
Absolutely, John. Well, for many years, we've had fire codes actually mandating the need for in-building communication for our first responders. It's only been in the last 5, maybe 6 years where we've seen authorities having jurisdiction enforcing the code. In really pivotal buildings, we've seen a significant amount of activity from active shooters to medical instances, but you have the International Fire Code Council 510 code, as well as the National Fire Protection Association Code 72-1221, that really spells out and provides standards for the industry and for in-building owners to work with their general contractors to make sure the code is addressed properly. We're going to be getting into more about the code. But there's actually federal Part 90 rules. We've got state and local amendments, as well as standards and listings. But the thing to really point out is the code is designed to guide us, but we see a lot of authority having jurisdiction interpretation. So you could go from one county, you can drive an hour away, and that particular AHJ may or may not actually enforce certain things certain ways. So you're going to get from a lot of us on the panel with public safety questions, what if this, and we might say it depends. And it's just getting familiar with the particular industry, things clear up.
Thank you for that. So now we're going to move to our table setter question. So this is an opportunity for our panelists to help to connect their personal experiences to and what their companies do to the topic, okay? So here's the table setter, right? More and more building owners have to comply with these fire codes that require in-building public safety radio coverage. So I'm going to go around the table here. Please tell the audience your company's business and your personal role, and what's the biggest impact this has had on your customers, starting with Kevin Kurz from Annixter.
Yes, thank you, John. So I work with Annixter. Annixter is a value-added logistics and supply chain solutions company that actually helps to build, connect, power, and protect infrastructure solutions globally. In my role, working as wireless business manager, I support our outside salespeople in the Southeast to actually identify end user projects that may need a public safety DAS system, but more importantly is to identify and help qualify the budget. So we offer some free services like scope review, qualify the project. We'll actually do a rough order of magnitude with some of our partners that are on this call, on this panel today, creating a bill of materials that we can go back to the customer and let them know what it looks like, what the cost is going to be. Unlike cellular DAS, with public safety, you can't really phase the project. So you're in a situation where you have to really control the entire area to pass the code, and do non-essential areas of cellular DAS might be a stairwell, a fire pump room that you have to do under public safety. So, it's one of the things we do is really act as a educator to the industry, and then taking away the biggest impact to my customers. I have 2 customers. I have enterprise customers that actually involve owning the building or a stakeholder, and then I have integrators that are joining us today. Really what's important is that the customer's experience with the safety in the building, the workplace productivity and all that is really what's driving it, but being able to really demystify this industry for building owners as well as integrators to the customer is really my greatest reward.
Thank you. Coming up next, we have Mike Castle, CTO and co-owner of Communication Electronics, one of the top system integrators in the space. Mike, coming to you.
Thank you, John. As you said, my name's Mike Castle. I'm CTO and one of the co-owners of Communications Electronics. We're a Maryland-based, family-owned business that really focuses. Our mission is to use wireless technologies to connect people in the moments that matter. And that really is a strong reflection of what we're doing with the codes in the industry and what we do as a business. We have four main business lines. We're an LMR dealer for Motorola, one of the top 10 dealers in the nation. We have intelligent transportation system division, security and access control, and then of course our in-building side of our business. From our history in public safety, we were founded in 1976, starting in the two-way radio industry. And that background has really meant that we've been in this industry for a very long time. We've been doing in-building systems since 2002, so going on 20 years. And a lot of times we have paired those with commercial mobile phone systems as well. One of the shifts that we're seeing in the industry right now is our business, whereas before it was very equally divided amongst those two types of systems, now is really shifting over toward public safety as these codes are requiring more and more businesses to implement the systems at new construction. So we really thank Connected Real Estate for the opportunity here today to be part of this panel, and really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And next up, we have Scott Umamoto, the Director of Strategic Technology from Day Wireless Systems. Very interesting company based on the West Coast. Scott, tell us about your company and how this topic impacts your customers, please, and what your role is.
Thanks, John. So as you mentioned, I'm the Director of Strategic Technology. Basically, it means I run the DAS division for Day Wireless. Much like Mike's company, Day Wireless has been in business for 50-some years. The core of our business has always been land mobile radio. So we are also a Motorola Platinum partner and Motorola Service Excellence partner, meaning we have extensive technical knowledge in the RF industry and serving our public safety customers and their radio systems. So about 10 years ago, we've been doing DAS for a long time, but about 10 years ago, DAS got very serious in terms of the code development and whatnot. So in 2015, Day Wireless really spun off a dedicated DAS division to provide our customers with a dedicated team of DAS professionals in terms of, we now have our own design department with engineers. We have our own project management team. We have construction teams. We developed a low volt electrical division, all in an effort to help our customers understand DAS and how it works. So as an RF company that specializes in public safety radios, our customers have come to us and to help them decipher how to put DAS in their buildings, how to understand code and what code means for them and the impact it has on their businesses. So navigating and understanding the code is very difficult. You have to have a solid understanding of RF and frequencies and how they work. It's a bit different. Actually, it is a lot different than the cellular, which has specific bands that everybody works in. Public safety codes can change from county to county, city to city. So you really have to understand how it works. So I think the biggest impact for DAS and the financial burden it puts on is for maintenance, annual certifications, all the things that DAS requires for our customers to make sure their systems work year in and year out. And so based on that, we have 26 physical locations up and down the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, California, and now expanding into Utah. But we also have customers that rely on us nationwide to take care of the stuff, and a few customers that actually rely on us on a worldwide basis to take care of the DAS solution. So we're here for them, and looking forward to help anybody that needs more systems for their DAS.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. Coming to Jeff. Jeff Funderburg, the VP of Real Estate Partnerships with Airwave Solutions. brings an interesting perspective to the table. Jeff, tell us about airways and how this, this topic has impacted your business model, your customers, and what your role is there.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here and really appreciate the panelists and the diversity of the team you brought together. Airwaves is a wireless CRE PropTech investor with roughly 50 million square feet of in-building cellular coverage in our portfolio today. We help people ultimately solve their in-building wireless coverage issues, and where possible, we help them monetize that infrastructure. And of course, this covers public safety, traditional cellular, as well as Wi-Fi and private LTE, and even IoT solutions. As VP of Real Estate Partnerships, my role is to really help property owners navigate the complex ecosystem to maximize the benefits of wireless in general. And that, in the case of public safety, helps them really understand jurisdictional boundaries and relationships where their properties are located, and give them some compliance and enforcement support, as well as help them develop the infrastructure itself.
Great, very good. Thank you. I appreciate that. And last but certainly not least, many of you know Rebecca Hunter, Vice President with Arrow Wireless Group. Rebecca, if you could tell us a little bit about what Arrow does today, what you're going to do in the future, and what your role there.
Sure. Thanks so much. We're really happy to be on such a great panel today. So Arrow Wireless Group has been around for about 20 years, based in Boulder, Colorado, and we really have very traditionally focused on the physical connected infrastructure for wireless carriers. We have expanded over the last couple of years into broadband and municipal consulting, and really the idea that we really have to come together in public and private partnerships and really leverage the expertise and the needs from kind of both of those sides. So talking, about bringing the carriers to the table, bringing your public safety partners to the table, and again, in a lot of ways, making sure that the cities and counties and states that you work with are also aligned with that vision of a smarter, connected community, which a foundation of that, and especially as we know now with the need for in-building connectivity even greater than it even has been in the past, and more people are staying in buildings more and more these days, that the idea that we've got to have a robust wireless connectivity system on both the public safety and the commercial side, and how do we all come together in a strategic partnership, both to deploy it, to finance it, but really, again, to find solutions to serve all of the folks that are out there who need this.
Thanks. That was a great table setter, and I enjoyed hearing all the different perspectives. And I like certainly what Rebecca brought up there, that recent events have certainly had a big impact on the way that companies work, on where people live, where they work from, and the importance of ubiquitous connectivity. Here in Philadelphia, they're trying to figure out how to give all the school kids access to the internet and online learning. Populations are shifting, more work at home out in the suburbs. So you have the wireless carriers beefing up their capacity in the bedroom communities, and a lot of bandwidth that is going unused during the day. So all of that is impacting the market. It's going to have a big impact on how people use commercial real estate. So let's dive right in here. The next slide that I have here is a diagram that we're going to use as the basis for the next 4 questions. Okay, so everybody mentally burn this into your brain. No, I'm kidding. We're going to move on from this diagram and keep it present for you as we ask the first questions. And the first is going to be, what are the basic requirements of in-building public safety radio coverage systems? I'm going to go to our technology providers first for some discussions around this. Going with you first, Mike. Mike, what are the basic requirements? If you were to look at this diagram, take the audience through at a high level what these basic elements are, please.
Okay, John, you start with the rooftop antenna, donor antenna. The purpose of that antenna is to communicate to the macro tower site for the first responder network. That would be connected to your bidirectional amplifier, labeled as amplifier there. And then on from that, those red lines are coax cable that connect to the couplers, splitters, and eventually the antennas that are within the building, distributed within the building. You could easily follow the radio path there from the public safety tower, radio tower, through the donor antenna, amplifier, and out to the distributed antennas for when an emergency responder is in the building listening to a transmission over their network. And then conversely, if they're making a transmission, it would go in the reverse direction through those distributed antennas back through the amplifier and out. And then over on the left side, you have a few things. The battery backup unit is there. That ensures that if power is lost, the system remains operational. The annunciator panel shows the status of the alarms of the on the system. Code requires certain alarms to be monitored. And finally, the fire alarm panel ties those same alarms into the fire alarm so that if there is an alarm that comes up, it's notified through the monitoring system.
So coming to you, Scott. Scott, so talk about some of the infrastructure elements of these systems, and what are some of the common infrastructure elements that a system like this might have with other kinds of PropTech infrastructure or building management systems? You know, what are some of the things that these systems would have in common with them?
Well, part of that design of that system is there's a lot of cable infrastructure in there. So pathways are often common. So cable trays, things like that. So we have to get that antenna system throughout the building. So the pathways that are developed for all that cabling is also pathways that we could use for our infrastructure. Also, that amplifier, it has to go in an IDF or an MDF room that is shared with others, or a fire panel room. Some of the others, if you have a larger building, that amplifier could also be connected to fiber remote. So any type of dark fiber that is available within the system, we can take advantage of, or at least the pathways can be common in those cases. In some instances, depending on the jurisdiction, it is possible that the DAS or the antenna system can be shared with a cellular system. But that all depends on the HJ, whether that's allowed or not. Most don't like it, but it can be common in some cases.
So one of the common realities of our industry is the ever-present acronym, and I think we heard some of those acronyms there. Scott, what is an AHJ?
That's the authority having jurisdiction. So, and that could range from a fire marshal to a permitting office to a fire chief. It really differs in a lot of situations. So it's important to find out who that person is within that city, county. Who's that person that's going to enforce the code? That's the authority having jurisdiction.
Thank you. And of all the different elements, you mentioned pathway as being in common with other types of system, but you also mentioned fiber. What about other kinds of things like distributed power? And what about the labor itself? Are there similar skill sets that are required to do, say, for example, an in-building cellular reinforcement system compared to public safety? What do they have in common?
A lot of times, fortunately, the infrastructure for a DAS, it has to have a dedicated power. So because of the requirements by code, dedicated power is a requirement. It has to have its own backup battery system. So unfortunately, the things that are in common to just the technology of the building sometimes are limited because of the code makes it be a standalone type system. Like I said, the things like the fiber trays, the pathways that are put in for other types of technology can be used, but in a lot of cases, because of code, it does make it have to be separate at times. And that does increase the labor cost of getting those systems in the building.
And again, you mentioned variations in interpretation from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. One of the questions I get asked frequently is, if I have a huge backup generator system and a large battery plant and a data center, can it share common power? And you know, that's really up to the local code authority. So we're going to come to the next question, get into this a little bit deeper. And I'm coming to Kevin here on this question, which is, Kevin, what are some of the big drivers here from cost in these projects, right? What are some variations that, let's say that you're doing a project in County A, and then right next door in County B, they have different requirements. And County A is A cost and County B is 5 times more expensive. What are some of the things that might cause County B to be so much more expensive than County A?
That's a great question, John. So one thing that I've seen in my experience is it's never too early to be working with the end user, the building owner. We are very fortunate to have best-in-class system integrators on this panel with us. But what's the big cost impact is either being late to the table, right? And we'll talk about the different counties here in a second, but I get a lot of calls from building owners, or it could be a consultant or a general contractor saying, we're supposed to get a certificate of occupancy next Friday, and the AHJ is coming in and saying that we don't have a public safety system. So that happens quite a bit. And those of you that are in the industry have seen that, have lived that. So really the biggest cost impact is to make sure you're working with a very reputable DAS partner that understands IBWave and how to use our industry software for the heat mapping, creation of the bill of materials, that it's optimized. In the picture that's on the screen, there's 5 or 6 antennas there, but what's common in our industry, if the integrator is not aware of what's going on or hasn't got the proper experience, they may kind of go light on those antennas. And for public safety, that's not good at all, because you could wind up with a situation of an incident happening and the signal not being proper. That link budget calculation that's done through an algorithm through IBWave is very important. So really, when we look county to county, we also have to consider that no 2 venues are alike. I did a project in Chicago about 10 years ago, and there were 2 similar buildings, 6 stories across the street from one another. They were in the same county. However, there was 6 lanes of freeway between them. One actually cost about $300,000 to do, and the other one across the street took about 2 years to fill up, because the line of sight to the tower was blocked because the first building was shadowing it. So you do have a lot of different cost impacts. And the big thing is getting in late when the ceilings are already closed in. That's a huge problem. The integrators need to run the conduit. They need to run the cabling and any fiber. So that's pretty impactful. The other thing from county to county, to John's point, comes up to me in South Florida, where they have created permits or checklists, excuse me, of how they're going to actually work with the system integrator and the FCC license holder and how things are going to happen. And that's very much left to interpretation. So you're going to see some costs, for example, if the particular integrator is forced to use conduit versus not using conduit. Do they need a 2x2 fire chase for the vertical riser? There's just a lot of different key impacts that we'll talk through as we go on.
Thank you. Now, Mike, quick question for you. Do all buildings require these systems? So a couple of questions come to mind. You know, is it just new buildings, or is it retrofits? Do they ever get required in existing buildings? And if it is for new buildings, how do you know if the building needs coverage if the building hasn't been built yet? And I guess the last question would be, in an existing building, for example, is it 100% of the time that 100% of the floors need reinforcement, or is there ever a case where maybe just a part of the building needs coverage? So just to recap there, new buildings only, new and existing buildings, does the whole building need coverage? And how do you know if it needs coverage if it's not built yet? Take all the time you need. You have 60 seconds.
So the code requires all new buildings to be tested for public safety. Again, the point of these codes is to ensure that you have public safety service within the buildings. So if that service exists from the macro without a system being in there, that's fine. It just needs to be tested and confirmed by an integrator submitted to the AHJ to prove that. old construction, existing buildings, in some jurisdictions, that's been happening. That it's completely up to the AHJ. It can happen at times, and certainly if an existing building is renovated, the AHJ usually will hold them to the letter of the code in that case. As far as the whole building versus part of the building, best practice is always to test ahead of time. We often find that the upper level of buildings perform just fine from the existing outdoor system, and that we only need to reinforce some of the lower levels of the buildings, or even just the subterranean parts of the buildings. So all of that is important. And we can also estimate coverage for buildings that are yet to be constructed, knowing what their construction is going to be, as you talked about the lead construction levels, and we know where the macro towers are. We can calculate what the likelihood of coverage is within those buildings. So a lot of different things, but in the end, it's all about just having, as Kevin said, a reputable integrator who really knows the system and knows what's going to happen as some of these buildings come online.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Coming back to Scott. So Scott, how does a lack of clarity about these code requirements impact the bidding process? So you're out there bidding this work, right? And jurisdiction A has a set of requirements that is different than jurisdiction B. So, you know, if you miss a piece of scope, you could wind up being on the hook for doing that because the bid says you got to deliver a code compliant system. On the other hand, if you overspec it and, you know, something like conduit maybe is not required, then you bid too high and you lose the bid. And then here's the real wild card, which is you're bidding against someone who maybe is not really knowledgeable about these projects, and they're going to leave scope out and they're going to look cheaper than you. That must drive you crazy as a system integrator. What do building owners and people that are looking for good contractors this work need to know about clarity around codes? When should you get the code official involved? And how can a system integrator help a building owner understand what exactly they need and know more?
All great questions, John. And those are scenarios that we live every day. So yeah, the code clarity is very difficult. In fact, we give presentations to building owners, contractors, engineers, designers all the time. And a lot of it focuses around code clarity because every jurisdiction can interpret the code differently. They can adopt a code that is, you know, 5 years old and never have officially changed it. And so, or they can say, you know what, our code is going to be the most current NFPA code plus whatever we want to add to it. So you're correct in the fact that, you know, a contractor's goal is to put the building in at the lowest cost possible. So a low bidder, right, doesn't necessarily know or understand what the current code is. And so that could be very costly in the end. And the other thing is a lot of these buildings are spec'd out years in advance, right? So we could bid on a building, win a project, and it won't even be ready for construction for us in 18 months or so. And by that time, the code can change. And so it's very important to understand what the current code requirements are, get with the city AHJ and find out what they are going to enforce. I think from a contractor standpoint, you got to talk to your integrator and understand how they were going to approach code changes and how they were planning forward. If you're just going to blindly take the low bid, then you may be opening yourself up to some problems down the line when all of a sudden a code development changes and it's going to require much more or newer equipment or a different type of installation. So all those are good points, but as Mike said, you got to pick a good integrator, one that understands the business, understands and keeps up on code, and the contractor or the building owner has to understand it. Just because he's the lowest bidder, it does not mean he understands what the codes are coming. And the last thing I'll say, in a lot of specs that we find, they're cut and paste. They're cut and pasted from codes that are from other counties, other cities, or other years, and so they are not always up to date. So those code specs really have to be looked over pretty closely and then interpreted and then adjusted to what is current.
Thanks, I appreciate that. So I want to just say hello to the audience for a second, check in with you. Hope you're all doing well and that you're all safe and snug wherever you are and that your families are well. And I wanted to point out to you at the bottom of the panel, there's a Q&A. And if you do have questions, please go ahead and submit them. We have a Q&A session at the end, but every once in a while a question comes up that fits perfectly with what we're talking about right now. So let's say, for example, I'm gonna come to you, Jeff, here for this question. You know, you have a property that you have a great ocean view, right? And then someone builds a building between you and the ocean, right? That's a problem. And in this scenario, you have a building that has a great view of a radio tower. You put a system in, and then all of a sudden, a high rise goes up between you and that tower. And now all of a sudden, you have no coverage in the building. Do you have any recourse there, or you know, whether it's a wireless carrier or a public safety or whatever? Can you go tell that guy to take that building down or make him pay for your upgraded system, or is that on you?
No, unless you've got a lot of political influence, that building is going to remain a problem. But I think that the two solutions that address it are definitely the in-building DAS or distributed antenna system and the public safety system in the architecture that you just showed a few slides earlier. Ultimately, that has become part of, at least on the cellular side, the densification need for, that carriers are working through themselves. So they're using small cells, they're going to the street level on the cellular network side to address the problem. On the public safety side, it's strictly these systems that you're displaying now, where you're able to get around the buildings and capture signal with a donor antenna and then amplify that within the building and propagate it through the antenna structure.
Appreciate that. Thanks. Coming to Rebecca here. So Rebecca, you know, the kickoff of any great project is knowing who all the stakeholders are. Who are some of the obvious stakeholders, and who are some of the less obvious stakeholders? And I'm going to come to Kevin for a follow-up after that.
Yeah, I mean, I think as everybody has kind of stated here, I mean, the best plan is an early plan, and to make sure that you're not caught off guard, you know, during or toward the end of your project, to make sure you have everybody around the table, you know, at the beginning. And that's, again, from a municipal perspective, your code interpreters, your permit folks, and then the system integrator, your building owner. As far as, you know, do they have a preference on, again, there's lots of different choices of systems even. So making those decisions with the right engineering people, again, permit people. I would also say that there's been, you know, some conversation though about, you know, the carriers and a lot of the over the air, you know, applications, but, you know, even reaching out to the providers in the area, right, who already have some level of coverage, because a lot of times you can get a lot of insight into maybe some of their plans that are already in place or going to be in place in the next, you know, 12 to 18 months during that process of the building. So again, where can you leverage investment that's going in, work that's already going in, even at the street level, you know, outside a building that's going to be built? Is there fiber going to be coming down the street that you could access, you know, in your planning phase? And to add, you know, a lot of, I think to somebody else's point, we've been talking about the wireless over the air, but some of the issues will be more now fiber driven, right? So from the street into the building, in addition to trying to capture some of the over the air as, you know, more and more of that, the small cell infrastructure and the dense urban. So how to integrate that street level infrastructure with the building and make sure it's seamless. So those are some of the other folks that probably don't get invited to a lot of the building level conversations that could be helpful, again, in the early planning stages.
And I like where you're headed with that, the idea being that even though that the primary topic here is in building public safety repeater systems, that because of all the different things that can be shared, including common infrastructure and labor, having a wireless master plan that considers the other needs, including cellular reinforcement and what's going on, having awareness of those things is very important. Kevin, coming to you, one of the stakeholders that often gets left out of the discussion, because it always focuses on, quote, the AHJ, which a lot of times is shorthand for the fire code official, but there's another authority in every jurisdiction, which is the FCC license holder, or the people that actually operate the public safety radio system. They get left out of the conversation. So for things like if there's system causing interference, who gets involved, who's ultimately responsible for the performance of the system, and who can give permission to operate an amplifier system on a licensed frequency. So can you talk a little bit about that seldom talk about stakeholder, the FCC license holder?
Sure, John. That's, a very good, valid point, because, there has been so much education into the industry about the importance of the AHJ. You got to think back several years ago when they had the license auctions. These license holders spent a lot of money to get that, dedicated frequency. So, we really definitely have been working a lot more with them. I want to thank the industry to get more involved with the FCC license holder. And then the big thing is on interference. I mean, it's something that we have seen in some pretty big venues. There's been some cases that could get resolved, but these integrators that are joining us today, Communication Electronics, and also with Day Wireless, you get in a situation where when something can be identified through the design, you can put it so much easier together with the FCC license holder. One of the big things that we don't always see integrators do is make sure every single frequency that might be needed for that venue is actually in place. And you might look at a transportation venue and you don't think that maybe some type of other agency might be involved. So that's where having that FCC license communication is so integral. You want to make sure that if you're doing an airport, that the TSA frequencies are covered and whatnot. So that's the very, very important thing. And then integrators can also do testing on these systems before they go live to make sure that any oscillations are dealt with before the general public has to rely on that system.
That's all good advice. And I'm doing a quick time check here. It's 18 minutes to the hour, and we have, like in many cases, we could spend easily 2-3 hours on these sessions. But we're going to try to move through some of these next couple of topics quickly, which are design considerations, logistics, and then I'm going to move into day 2 operations and maintenance, which is often not considered. Design considerations and logistics, a lot of the choices about the labor, the cost of the systems can come down to matching the needs of the use case of the system to the available components and materials. And there's a lot of innovation that's happening right now as more and more of these systems get deployed, both on the active equipment side and also on the, the cables, the connectors, and other things like that. So Scott, to you first, what are some of the design decisions that can have a big impact on future readiness and cost of a project? And then I'll be coming to Mike for a similar question.
Sure, thanks, John. Well, a couple things that we noticed. One, in the design considerations, a lot of times in the building spec, if you're building something new, because it's code, public safety DAS is always #1, right? It has to be in there, code requires it. What these buildings don't think about in advance is, will my cell phones work in that building? And so a lot of times it's because it's not in the spec, it doesn't get put in because the contractor's not going to put in something that's not spec in the design. So when those are, when the building's done, it gets TCO, it gets occupied, oh, my phones don't work. Well, because you didn't put it up front, you're going to have a huge cost to retrofit that building. So just in terms of that, that's a huge design consideration. And the other thing is, they have to start planning for these like it's a utility. So put in the cable pathways, put in the rooms, know that that infrastructure has to go in the building, and put that in the design. Because if you don't, some of these buildings are very detailed, but they don't think about how a DAS is going to go in, and then we have to find special pathways, use special cables, build 2-hour shafts, and it gets very costly. So there's a lot of considerations that need to go in the very beginning.
Thank you. Mike, can you talk about some of the newer innovations that in materials and products that are having an impact on cost and time to install?
Some of the newer innovations, one innovation is the advent of really affordable Class A BDAs, traditionally Class Bs, which are bandpass, which they really allow the entire band, both the wanted and unwanted frequencies within a band to come through the system. Class A's really have allowed us to target frequencies for these systems to make sure we get just the frequencies we want. And even more importantly, one of the design aspects that's often overlooked is the uplink side of these systems. In other words, a person in the building speaking out or transmitting out of the building. Oftentimes we see these systems that are, as Scott said, designed inappropriately, where they don't have the density of antennas required in order to meet a loaded system performance requirement. So that's one of the pieces. We've had a lot of innovation in connectors, antennas, antenna performance, innovation even in cables, where we have jurisdictions who require 2-hour survivability for coaxial cables, and we have an industry who's responding, who's putting out product, albeit very expensive, but it meets the needs of the AHJs.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that. Kevin, logistics, frequently overlooked. What are some of the tricks of the trade of making a project run smoothly and on time?
Right, Mike and Scott will tell you that when they have their teams all deployed out in the field, sometimes when it's out of their local jurisdiction, the worst thing that could happen is the gear doesn't show up. It could show up damaged, it could show up in the wrong order. One thing we've seen in our industry is when the coax actual reel is laid flat, it causes elliptical crushing that's rendering the cable useless. And if that were to happen to an integrator when they've timed everything so carefully, it really hurts their gross profit ability to support that customer. And things really do break down from there. One of the things that we do at Annexter is we have special things in place to make sure that things are done just in time. We work with that integrator to make sure that we know the passives are going in first. It's also about how you put that pallet together. You don't want to put the fiber jumpers down at the bottom and then stock heavy stuff on top of it and wind up with getting your connectors crushed. So it's just, it requires a little bit of thought. We work closely with the integrator to make sure we understand the deployment schedule. We can actually wrap certain IDFs in a colored shrink wrap and offer some supply chain services that just makes those installers that work for our integrators really very thorough about how they deploy that network.
Sure, and from a building owner perspective, managing disruption to the tenants is important. Managing the security of the space is important. And having materials, stored all over the facility can be a problem. So having things sort of kitted up and just in time delivered to the correct floor to minimize some of that disruption is a real art and a science. So coming to Scott and then Jeff next, these systems require mandatory monitoring for correct performance or alarm conditions. And so that begs the question of who's going to look at that stuff. Will the building owner do it, or can they sub that work out? And then obviously ongoing operations, repeated RF testing to make sure the system is still performing and whatever. So Jeff, very briefly, what are some of the monitoring and ongoing performance requirements required by code?
Well, basically the network elements throughout the system that make up the system, there are several of them that require monitoring for off or on. And the proper network connectivity to the fire panels, as well as the network operations center from an integrator or a partner, will help you alarm those and actually keep you in compliance.
Thanks,
sometimes,
Scott. What are the specific elements that need to be monitored for alarm condition on these systems?
Well, there are 5 basic ones that are usually listed. You know, you got to know if that the amplifier is hitting the donor site. You got to have power. Does your battery backup work? Is your system on? There are others that are coming about in certain jurisdictions. They want to know if the antenna is still connected, if the coax line has been broken or not. So there are generally 5 main ones, but there are also other ones that are coming about in certain jurisdictions that we all have to be aware of. And that's where in your earlier pictorial, the annunciator panel does that, but it connects to the fire panel generally as 1 contact closure and 1 alarm. So when someone shows up on site, they can look at that alarm panel and they can know which one is actually causing the alarm. The other comment you had earlier too about maintenance, most of these systems have to be recertified on an annual basis, which means you have to go through the building and do the recertification grid test to verify that the system is up and running as it's supposed to. The biggest cost factor when you do those over the years, if the building owners need to be aware of, is your batteries will probably have to be replaced. And that is a cost that they will endure besides the certification test.
I appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit about future readiness. There's no such thing as future proofing, but there is future readiness. Rebecca, you talked about things like future technologies like smart building and smart city and smart community technologies like small cell. What are some of the common infrastructure elements that those kinds of technology use that might be in consideration in a public safety project that might be leverageable in the future for new technology?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of commonality in when you think of connectivity in a kind of a holistic manner, whether it serves, you know, private sector, again, public sector, public safety, transportation, regardless, the common core infrastructure, I think, as Scott mentioned earlier, you know, your risers, your chases, your you know, kind of legacy telco rooms, if you will, all of those need to be well planned out and really toward that future technology. How can you really make those spaces and those common needs as kind of plug and play ready, you know? So if you need to, as technology evolves or equipment evolves, you know, to be able to get to those spaces and add or swap or change or upgrade in very easy, efficient, accessible ways. And again, when you look at where they're trying to integrate between the streetscape or, you know, the small cells, outdoor small cells with the indoor, you know, DAS systems or small cell systems within a building, there's a lot of cross usage, right, that goes, and there has to be seamless connections between the building and the roadway. And again, that's public safety needs that seamless. When you start looking at, again, future technologies, whether you're looking at adding CBRS later, which is a technology that a lot of building owners and a lot of carriers and customers are looking at, transportation, as transportation gets more integrated into our buildings. All of that really has like common base connectivity needs that can be considered as you're designing kind of a strategic plan for the building.
Excellent, thank you. We're almost at the end of our time here. Going to try to move quickly. Coming to you, Jeff. So how does Airways create sort of a master wireless or connectivity plan for the properties that you work with strategically? How do you go about doing that? What's the process?
well, we start with categorization of the properties if we're looking at a portfolio. And from there, we look at the level of service that they want to provide tenants in terms of revenue generation opportunities. And we look at tech stacking or technology stacking from the fiber core through the elements and applications that serve their needs from a revenue, cost efficiency, and safety, public safety perspective.
Thank you. Coming into the last question here, and this is for Jeff. What funding vehicles are available for these projects today? I mean, you know, a lot of times these projects are a surprise.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times, kind of like ICT, you know, it's last in, first out. It's the last element to go in the budget and it's the first one to be cut. So, and a lot of times it's an unfunded surprise that might, somebody mentioned C of O, certificate of occupancy, earlier. So, so how has the model changed? What was the old model and how has it changed?
Well, the original model was always venue funded, right? They would own it, and there was some legal kind of concerns depending on what state and jurisdiction you spoke with around actual ownership of the asset being on, you know, the venue owner's books. But the we're seeing some change where models are being developed where they're creating an OpEx opportunity for the venue versus a one-time capital expense. So they're financing these through partners, some like Airwaves, and they're also just looking at a straight leasing of capital equipment.
All right, well, we did it. We've made it to the Q&A section. And I'm going to turn to some of the questions in the panel here. We have some great questions. Kevin, when will mandatory requirements for in-building public safety sweep the nation? When is this going to be ubiquitous? And of course, we don't actually know the answer to the question, but what is the momentum here? Is there momentum across the country?
Great question for whoever posed that. You know, obviously, we have seen a ton of active shooter situations. We've seen medical situations. We've seen some terrorism. And it really comes down to what, at least I'll speak for myself and let the others chime in. It really has been more of a reactive situation to a particular municipality. Unfortunately, that's just the brutal truth of it. What I'm seeing in the last several years, especially in and around K-12, is a lot more proactive AHJs, counties. There's a huge number of schools that are being done right now as we speak. Even more that are calling those AHJs and those counties and asking them how they did it. So I do think you're going to see a tremendous increase in the AHJs enforcing versus just worrying about the mandate. I hope that we can keep the interpretation down to a minimum so that we can really scale up on this.
Thanks. I have a question for Scott and a follow-up to Mike. I'm going to sort of consolidate this question with a couple other questions together, but generally it's, how do you recommend that companies deal with the challenge of new construction RFPs that are written copy-paste style by consultants that don't necessarily understand local requirements and that often include outdated or erroneous requirements? Scott, how do you deal with that? And then after Scott, coming to Mike, and then we're right up against our time.
Yeah, we see that a lot, like I mentioned before about the cut and paste. And so, I mean, we've had them before where it's an 800 megahertz public safety that we know it is, but they require a VHF. I mean, obviously they cut it and paste it from somewhere else. So the only way we do it is we go right to the Q&A of the RFP and we send it to either the GC or the EC or whoever's in charge and say, hey, you have a problem, your spec is not correct. And so we look for resolution right off the bat to make sure everybody's aware of it, because it really affects the bidding price of responding to that RFP. So again, we try to address it right in the very beginning.
And Mike, coming to you for the last question. So how do you work with the building owner, the general contractor, the EC, whoever's the prime here, to become their trusted advisor to guide them through? Because, you know, that relationship may evolve over the course of the project. How do you turn them from, you know, somebody who's taking your bid to somebody that really trusts you to get them over the goal line? And what should they be looking for in a partner when they're selecting someone who can help them do that?
We really focus on education up front. we try to get in ahead of these opportunities with architects, engineers, property owners, that sort of thing. Really try to educate them like we have today about what a system is, what's required, and some of the pitfalls of those systems. And then we also make sure that we're connecting them with the AHJs. And oftentimes there are multiple AHJs. You know, we have jurisdictions where we have 3 AHJs involved in the systems that we're putting in. And being able to be a trusted partner with them really relies on us having knowledge of those AHJ requirements and being able to show the property owner what they're looking for, what the AHJs are looking for, and what's required to make these systems work well. And then finally, it's all about delivery, right? You get one opportunity, you deliver well, you go in and able to do what you say you are going to do without change orders and that sort of thing. And that really secures the relationship and gives us the opportunity to work in a larger plan with them.
Thank you. I'd like to take this moment to thank our panelists. I love these conversations. I could go easily for another couple of hours. To the audience out there, thank you for sharing the time. I have a couple of quick things for you. The first is, if someone wants to look at Scott's background and tell me what that beach is or where that beach is, if you send me a private chat and you get it right, I will send you a Safer Buildings Coalition Challenge coin. First person to get the correct answer for what beach that is behind Scott gets a coin, and all the panelists already know, so you don't get one. The next thing is that we're coming right up against the break in the program, and there's a fantastic opportunity to go do networking. It's one of the most highly valuable parts of the Connected Virtual Tech event, which is the chat rooms and the virtual booths. So if I understand correctly, Annexter, CEI, and Day all have booths over there. There'll also be a booth for public safety. I'll be hanging out in all those booths. I'm going to be moving around, as will some of our members. Please drop in on those. You're going to find a lot of the value there. Get in there and start a conversation. Thank you to Rich Berliner, Aaron Friedman, the Connected Real Estate team, to Mike, Kevin, Scott, Jeff, and Rebecca. You're the best. And to the audience out there, stay safe. Thanks for tuning in.